The last time I stood on this stage, I was flanked by two aviation greats. On my right stood Connie Bolin, and on my left stood my flight instructor and mentor, Ron Alexander. Ron and Connie were presenting me with a scholarship in memory of Connie's husband, Ed Bolin. After they presented me with the scholarship, Ron asked me if I wanted to say something to the crowd, which was gathered here for our Vintage Day. I shyly shook my head no, so Ron just laughed and continued speaking to the crowd. Later that afternoon, Ron told me that one day he'd like to see me speak in front of a large audience, preferably here on this very stage, gazed on by people such as yourselves. Little did we know I would get this chance at an event that neither of us saw coming. Regardless, here I am, doing what Ron would have wanted me to do. Before I continue, I would like to thank the Alexander family for allowing me to pay tribute to their husband, father, father-in-law, and grandfather. I know Ron is watching over us today, probably cursing about how we closed the restaurant on a Saturday afternoon. But oh well, I think he will get over it after he sees his closest friends, family, and fellow aviators joining together in his honor. As you all know, many people have already published wonderful articles about Ron and the successful life he led. We all know how he affected the lives of so many, gave back like he had nothing to lose, and was one of the humblest men one could ever meet. To prevent myself from saying what has already been said, I want to share with you the Ron I got to know. The Ron I saw almost every day for 2 years possessed many traits that would leave my peers and I saying, when I grow up, I want to be just like Ron. We were in awe of his uncanny ability to talk business, only to turn around and engage in hanger smack talk and gossip. He always spoke his mind and was brutally honest with us. If he didn't like what he was hearing or seeing, he would say, I'm going to take you out behind that woodshed and beat your butt. Only he didn't say but. Although he would say things like this, I think it was always out of love. As his student, I experienced firsthand the joy that young aviators brought to him. Whenever he could spare the time, Ron could be found giving young people their first flight lessons, usually in his DC-3, Cub, Stearman, or even the Jenny. Not only was I lucky enough to have received my first flight lesson from Ron in his DC-3 on the way home from Oshkosh 2015, but I was fortunate in that I learned firsthand from him for over 7 months. Ron becoming my flight instructor is something I am forever thankful for. But Ron also had his own selfish reasons for training me. You see, he had a grand scheme in the making. After I earned my tailwheel endorsement, which I have since done, he was going to instruct and solo me in his Cub, Stearman Cloudboy, all in preparation for me to become his co-pilot in the DC-3. The reason for this grand scheme? Ron said he wanted me to be the one breaking him out of the nursing home to take him flying in it. He didn't care if he was in a wheelchair, hooked up to oxygen, or on his deathbed. He made me promise, and I did. I was so excited at the thought of freeing a 99-year-old Ron to take him flying in the airplane that gave us both the best of memories. Not only was I fortunate enough to have known Ron as one of the most skilled aviators, but I was also lucky enough to have known him as a person. Along with being my flight instructor, Ron also played a grandfather-like role in my life. He served as a humorous, encouraging, positive, and protective individual throughout the 2 short years that I knew him. When flying, his favorite phrases consisted of, "Atta girl, there you go, honey, and you got it now." I rarely saw Ron angry with anyone or anything, except for when someone brought up Hillary Clinton. Another aspect of Ron that many of you may not have been as familiar with was his protective side. Not only was he making sure I would be the safest pilot, but he was always looking after me. Ron would always tell me he would never let anything bad happen to me in the air or on the ground. In his mind, dating was one of those bad things. He loved telling me over and over not to date and that boys were the worst thing that could ever happen to me. At the annual Warbird weekend this past September, Ron and I were walking to the DC-3. Parked next to the 3 was a beautiful P-51 Mustang, my favorite airplane. I turned to Ron and I said, "I love the DC-3 and all, but I would do anything to go for a ride in that." He shook his head, looked at me, and said, "Honey, don't say that, because some of these old men are going to take you seriously." I think that is the Ron we all miss the most, the humor, straightforwardness, and normalcy he brought to every conversation is unsurpassable. Thursday, November 17th, 2016, was a perfect and productive day for Ron. That morning, he flew his beloved DC-3. That afternoon, he arrived at the place he built from the ground up, Candler Field Museum. And after arriving, he was able to pass on more words of wisdom to myself and fellow student Jacob Gates. Later, he went on to warn me of boys, just like he always did, and how I needed to do a better job of keeping him up to date on airport gossip. Soon after, he watched as I took the champ up for a solo flight, and he said he would sign my logbook after he gave some Jenny rides. He asked Jacob and I to help him get the Jenny out and to be wing walkers for the night. In return, he would give us a sunset flight. He introduced us to 2 men from the FAA, Chris and Larry, 2 very nice men that were extremely interested in everything going on here at Candler Field. We went on to pre-flight the Jenny and pulled across the runway. After fueling the Jenny, Kevin Sasser arrived in his Carbon Cub, and Ron and Kevin talked as myself, Jacob, AJ Joyner, and Dave Holick chatted with Chris and Larry. A little while later, Kevin flew out, and Ron was ready to warm up the Jenny. Chris was the first passenger to go, taking a GoPro with him to capture the beautiful southern sunset and an airplane that many people could only dream of flying. AJ and I got in position to wing walk the Jenny down the runway. When we could no longer keep up, we let go, and the Jenny took flight. After a 10 or 15-minute ride around the patch, the Jenny turned final, and AJ and I got in position again to grab the Jenny's wings to serve as the brakes and rudders. We latched on and ran with the Jenny down the runway. We turned it around on 3-1, and Chris hopped out. Ron smiled at Jacob, AJ, and myself and told us we would get a ride if we had enough daylight after he took Larry. During another brief run-up, Ron let go of back pressure on the stick, and the Jenny's tail jumped up, and the plane almost toppled forward. Ron looked at us and said, "And that's why you keep the stick back," as he laughed and stuck his tongue out at us. A few minutes later, Ron and Larry gave the signal that they were ready to go. I did not know this was the last time I would ever see Ron, Larry, or the Jenny. If I would have known, I would have never let go. Over the past few months, I have found comfort in knowing that this is how Ron would have liked to have spent his last day, flying his most treasured airplane at the place he created and loved so much, sharing his love of flight with everyone he could, and seeing his students grow as aviators, mechanics, and people. I find myself going back to a certain conversation I had with Ron when we were flying in our champ. Out of nowhere, he said, "Cayla, I've been doing this for almost 60 years, and I can honestly say I still love it. Not many people can say that about their job. Aren't we lucky?" He then went on to say, "And if I leave this earth in an airplane, I would be okay with that. But you know, I'm 74 years old, and I'm going to be around for at least 74 more." Ron loved life and lived it with a vigor that is unparalleled. He has left behind a legacy so great that it will take all of us joining together to make sure his dreams, goals, and spirit lives longer than we do. In my almost 18 years on this earth, I have been fortunate enough to have lost no one close to me. So when Ron's time came, I was lost, angry, sad, and in disbelief. Grief is a new emotion I had to and still am coping with. I am consoled by our big aviation family and the constant support we have for one another. Although there is a missing member, we will never forget the times that we shared together. Ron's physical presence has left us, but he is among us. He is walking right alongside us, flying with us, and watching over us. Ron would always say he would never let anything bad happen to me, but now I'm more assured than ever. We have been blessed with the best guardian angel, and his name is Ron Alexander. Thank you.